Montana Territory, August 1877. The sun had barely crested the Absaroka Range when the peace of Willow Creek shattered. Willa Whitlow was barefoot, still in her nightdress, when the riders came. She had been pouring water into a tin basin for her morning wash, the scent of soaproot on her damp palms, when hooves thundered over the ridge like a war drum. Her father's rifle was by the door, but he had passed last winter. Her mother's grave was up near the cottonwoods. No one left in the valley but Willa and her younger brother, Eli. The men did not knock. Her scream barely left her throat before one of them yanked her by the arm and dragged her from the cabin. Eli, only 9, lunged at the man, teeth bared like a starving wolf cub. The brute kicked him hard in the ribs. Eli crumpled, gasping. "Leave him," a thick voice barked. "We only need the girl." Willa fought until her nails split. She bit the one called Griff hard enough to taste blood. He slapped her. Then they tied her wrists and threw her over the back of a mottled gray horse. The last thing she saw of home was Eli crawling toward her, blood on his lip, reaching. Then they rode. 3 miles out, a cowboy named Silas Zane spotted the dust trail. He had been riding fence for the McCready Ranch, headed back from the southern line with a coil of barbed wire slung across his saddle. He was lean, sun-browned, and quiet as a coyote. His eyes, gray as a storm, narrowed when he saw the gray horse in the lead. Griff Malone. Silas had known men like him during the war, those who took what they wanted and counted fear as payment. He spurred his horse, a deep-chested dun named Boone, toward the trail. The buckskin kicked up dirt as they moved fast through the dry grass and scrub, following the hoofprints. He did not know her name yet. But when they stopped an hour later to water the horses at Dry Hollow, Silas kept to the ridge above them, watching. She was thrown to the ground like a sack of meal. Her lip was split. Her hands were tied. And her eyes held. The moment she looked up toward the ridge, it was like she saw him through the trees. Like she knew help had come. A single glance. That was all it took. He saw her. And he was not riding away. They moved fast across the prairie, taking the old trail through Rattler's Pass. Griff was headed for the canyon country near the Idaho line. Silas tracked them for 2 days, sleeping under his saddle blanket and eating jerky straight from the pouch. He moved careful, always staying back just enough to not be seen. On the 3rd night, just past moonrise, they camped near a rockfall. Willa was tied to a tree. Griff and his men were drunk on rye and overconfident. They had not noticed the 6th set of hoofprints following them since Willow Creek. That night, Silas came down the ridge like a ghost. He took the first guard from behind, one hand over his mouth, knife quiet and fast. The second never saw the butt of Silas's Colt before it cracked against his skull. Griff staggered up, pistol in hand, but he had only seconds. Willa screamed as the firelight caught the flash of steel. Griff fired once, missed. Silas shot him through the shoulder, then knocked the weapon from his hand. Griff fell hard. Silas turned to her. She was breathing fast, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears and blood. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, dazed. "I think so." He stepped closer, eyes not leaving hers. "I saw you, back at Dry Hollow. I promised myself I would not let them take you." Her voice cracked. "You came all this way?" "I did." She stared at him, something sharp and soft in her gaze. "Who are you?" "Silas Zane, Cowboy, McCready Ranch." "And you?" "Willa Whitlow." He knelt, cut the ropes from her wrists gently. She winced as the blood came rushing back. "You have family?" he asked. "My brother," she whispered. "Eli. They left him behind. I do not know if he is hurt bad. We will go back." First light. She reached for him without thinking, her fingers curling into the front of his shirt. He steadied her. For a moment, they simply breathed. Silas looked at her like she was a prayer answered. Willa looked at him like he was the first safe place she had found in years. At sunrise, they rode hard back toward Willow Creek. The cabin was still standing. Eli was outside, clutching a rifle too big for him, eyes wild. When he saw Willa, he dropped it and ran. She pulled him into her arms, tears spilling down her cheeks. Silas stood back, shoulders tight. Later, while Willa tended to Eli's bruises inside the cabin, Silas fixed the busted door and fed the fire. He did not say much. He never did. But when Willa came out, hands still red from cleaning, she walked straight to him. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You do not have to." She looked up at him. "I want to." He blinked, surprised. "How?" She hesitated, then reached for his hand. "Stay. For a little while." Silas nodded, once. "All right?" They stood there, quiet, the wind turning the grass silver in the early light. Neither said it yet, but both of them knew. Something had started, and neither one of them wanted it to end. The first frost had not yet come, but the mornings were turning sharper. Willa stood on the porch with a chipped mug in her hands, steam rising from the pine needle tea she'd brewed before dawn. The wood Silas had split the night before still lay in neat stacks along the wall, and Eli's boots were just inside the threshold, drying near the hearth. She could hear the scrape of a shovel from behind the barn. Silas had taken it upon himself to clear the irrigation ditch that had been clogged since spring. He hadn't asked. He just saw the need and stepped into it. Willa set her cup down and walked toward the sound, braid brushing her back, sleeves rolled to the elbows of her father's old work shirt. The earth was dry and stubborn, but Silas worked it with the same quiet resolve he gave to everything, sleeves damp with sweat, jaw set. "You're digging in the hard pan," she said, folding her arms. "I noticed." He glanced up and his mouth twitched, not in amusement, but in acknowledgement. "There's a better spot a few feet east. Water never ran true through this stretch." Silas leaned on the shovel. "You know this land better than I do. I was raised on it." He nodded once, then shifted the shovel and began again, closer to the spot she'd pointed out. She crouched beside him, pulling dry grass from the ditch wall. "You always work this steady? Work's simpler than people." "You think so? Work tells you what it needs. People don't." She paused, fingers brushing a root. "Then why'd you come after me?" Silas didn't answer right away. He kept digging, the dirt falling in low thuds. When he did speak, his voice was quieter than before. "Because I couldn't ride past it." "Not when I saw what they were doing." Willa looked at him, really looked. His face was lined from sun and silence, not age. 30, maybe a little more. No ring. No stories about anyone waiting. She wiped her hands on her skirt. "You sleep all right?" "On the porch. Keeps me close enough if Eli needs anything. He's been asking about you." Silas straightened. "What did you say?" "That you're decent with a hammer and make terrible coffee." He almost smiled then, not in a way that asked for attention. Just a flicker like warm thundersnow. Later, while Eli was out checking the snares, Willa brought a bowl of stew to where Silas was patching the chicken coop. He sat on the stump, took it with a nod, and began to eat without ceremony. "You plan to keep riding?" she asked. "Hadn't figured it yet. You could stay through harvest. If you wanted, I could pay you in eggs and dry beans. And winter," she hesitated. "Would that be too long?" He didn't look up from his bowl. "Don't reckon I'd mind." A gust of wind stirred the cottonwoods. Leaves fell like slow coins. Willa sat beside him, closer than before. Not touching, but near enough that when she leaned forward to rest her elbows on her knees, their shoulders nearly met. "I know what folks might say," she murmured. "A man staying on with a widow's daughter." "Let them talk," he said. "I came for you, not them." She turned her head to him. "You don't know much about me. I know how you fought." Willa looked down at her hands. "I used to think if I loved someone, they'd stay. My ma, then my pa. Now it's just Eli and me." Silas set the bowl down. "You don't have to do it alone." She met his eyes, steady this time. "You offering?" "I'm here, aren't I?" The space between them held. Then Willa reached out and placed her hand over his. Not a question. Not a plea. Just a quiet tether. Silas didn't pull away. The sun dipped lower behind the ridgeline, throwing long shadows across the valley. The chickens clucked softly in their roost. Eli's footsteps rustled across the dry grass, heading home. Neither Willa nor Silas moved. They just sat there, fingers laced like two people who'd finally found something they didn't have to run from. By late September, the garden had given its last. Willa stood in the furrowed rows, pulling the last of the turnips, her fingers raw from the chill in the soil. A storm had rolled over the mountains 2 nights before, and the wind had stripped the quaking aspens bare. Silas had built a cold frame for the cabbages, using old window panes and salvaged pine boards. She hadn't asked, he just cut the glass to fit and nailed it in place while Eli watched from a stool, a strip of jerky in his teeth and a question always forming. The 3 of them shared the work now without ceremony. Eli fed the hens and checked the traps before breakfast. Willa kept the hearth warm. Silas mended the roof before snow could find its way through the seams. The rhythm was not spoken aloud, but it settled between them like a kind of agreement. That morning, when Willa came into the cabin with the turnips in her apron, she found Silas sitting at the table, sharpening his axe blade with long, slow strokes. She dusted her hands and leaned against the doorway. "You ever think about building?" she asked. He glanced up. "Building what?" "Something that's yours. Not just fixing what someone left behind." Silas wiped the blade clean with a rag. "I did once. Before the war." "What stopped you?" He set the axe down carefully. "I came back different. Couldn't hold still long enough to make anything last." Willa crossed the room and began slicing the turnips. "You've stayed here longer than anywhere, haven't you?" "I have." She scooped the pieces into the stew pot, then turned to face him. "Does it feel like holding still?" He met her eyes. "No. Feels like something else." She didn't press. Instead, she ladled water from the kettle and stirred the broth, the scent of thyme rising with the steam. Silas stood and stepped past her to the cupboard, where he pulled down the tin box she used to keep her stitching. "I fixed that tear in Eli's coat," he said. "But your needle snapped. You got another." "In the drawer by the hearth," she said. "Wrapped in blue cloth." He found it and unrolled the fabric with care. "Seems you've kept everything in order." Willa's hands stilled over the pot. "I had to. After my mother went, there wasn't much room for forgetting." Silas didn't answer right away. He slid the needle into the box and closed it. "You don't talk about her much." She had a laugh that carried through the trees. "My father said it scared the deer off early." Silas leaned against the wall, arms folded. "And your father?" "He never raised a hand, but he had a way of looking at you when you lied. You'd confess before he said a word." Silas nodded slightly. "Sounds like the kind of man I'd have wanted to know." The room was quiet but for the soft bubbling of the stew. Outside, a low wind stirred the dry grass. Willa moved to the window and watched the clouds gathering over the ridge. "You planning to ride out before snow?" she asked. He stepped forward, slow but certain. "I was. Not now." She turned. "Why not?" "Because I've been carrying a saddle long enough. Feels like I could hang it up here." Willa's voice dropped. "That's not a promise I'd want made lightly." "It's not." She studied him, her head tilted just enough to show the doubt that still lived in her bones. "You'd stay through winter?" "I'd stay through what comes after, too. If I'm wanted." Eli's knock on the front door broke the silence. Willa opened it, and he rushed in with a grin, holding a rabbit by the ears. "Caught near the creek. Can I skin it?" She nodded and handed him the small blade from the shelf. "On the block. Keep the pelt clean." He ran out again, boots thudding across the porch. Silas stepped close. "You've done right by him." Her voice caught. "I've tried." He reached out, hesitating only once before brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to try alone." She closed her eyes at his touch, then opened them again, steady and clear. "Then don't leave." "I won't." Outside, Eli hooped as the rabbit slipped from his grip. Willa laughed quietly, a sound she hadn't made in months. Silas's hand found hers, and this time neither of them let go. By the time the first snow dusted the low hills, Silas had moved inside. There was no discussion about it. The wind had begun slipping through the chinks in the porch boards, and Willa, without looking up from her sewing, had pointed to the corner where her father's cot once stood. The blankets were already folded. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Silas lay there with his boots tucked beneath his saddle and his hat resting on his chest, listening to the stove tick as it cooled. In the quiet, Willa's breath moved soft beside the hearth. She hadn't taken to talking much after dark, and neither had he, but the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It was something else now, an understanding, maybe, or the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. The days shortened. Snow came in fits, never deep, but enough to keep the horses close and the hens wary. Eli carved a whistle from pine and spent his mornings trying to teach it to the dog from the neighboring ranch that had taken to visiting. The animal was lame in one leg and full of burrs, but it slept by the barn and barked at anything that didn't belong. One evening, after supper, Silas sat at the table oiling his rifle. Willa was sorting dried beans by the fire, her back to him. He spoke without lifting his eyes. "You ever think about selling this place?" She didn't turn. "Once. After my father died. Thought I might go east. My mother had a cousin in Ohio who wrote once a year. You still have their address?" "No. I burned their letters after I decided I wasn't going." Silas set the rifle aside. "Why didn't you?" "I knew I'd never fit there. I've got too much quiet in me." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "You think I'd fit?" Willa glanced over her shoulder. "You mean here?" "I mean with you. With Eli." She stood then, slowly, and crossed the room. She didn't sit but rested her hand on the edge of the table, fingers pale against the wood. "Do you want to build something here?" she asked. "I do. But only if it's yours to." Her breath caught just once. "It would be." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Later, when Eli was asleep and the dog had curled beside the door, they stood outside beneath a sky thick with stars. Silas held a lantern, the wind tugging faint against his coat. Willa pointed toward the slope beyond the barn. "There," she said. "That's where my father meant to build a second cabin. Said it'd get the best sun come spring." Silas followed her gaze. "You still want it?" "I want something that's ours." He turned to her. "Then I'll start clearing it tomorrow." She nodded. "We'll need more nails before long. I'll ride into town." Willa's voice dropped. "You'll come back." He didn't hesitate. "Every time." She looked at him then, really looked, and whatever had been guarded in her all these weeks fell quiet. She stepped closer and placed both hands on his coat. He steadied her waist, slow, like the moment might shift if he moved too fast. When their foreheads touched, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The cold pressed around them, but between their coats and breath and closeness, the night held warmth. They stayed like that until the lantern burned low. Then they went inside, together, and when Silas lay down on the cot, Willa reached across the space and took his hand beneath the quilt. They slept that way, joined, as the snow deepened outside. By mid-November, the cabin had taken shape. Nothing grand, just a single room framed with tamarack hauled from the western edge of the property, its corners notched tight and sealed with moss and clay. The roof waited on cedar shingles still curing in the barn, but the walls stood square, and the window frames faced the morning sun like Willa had wanted. It wouldn't be ready before snow set in deep, but come spring, it would be their home. Eli had taken to carving figures from scrap wood horses, mostly, though lately he'd started shaping a likeness of Boone, Silas's old dun. He kept it quiet, working behind the barn in the hours between chores and supper. Silas saw the shape of the ears and the slant of the jaw and said nothing, just passed the boy a finer knife when the old one dulled. One afternoon, Willa walked the ridge above the homestead alone. She hadn't asked Silas to come, hadn't told Eli where she was going, but they'd both known she needed the time. The air was dry and sharp, and the grass had turned brittle underfoot. She climbed to the rise where her father had once built a brush shelter for watching elk in the valley below. It was gone now, collapsed under seasons of snow and wind, but the stones they'd used for the fire ring still held their shape. She sat on one of them, pulled her shawl tighter, and listened to the wind moving through the cottonwoods along the creek. Her hands rested in her lap, still and pale, and for the first time in weeks she let herself feel the weight of what had passed, the taking, the fear, the way the world had tilted and then steadied again. She didn't cry. The tears had come and gone in the early days. What she felt now was quieter, not grief exactly, but the ache that comes from surviving something that almost didn't let you. She stayed until the sun dipped low, then made her way back down. Silas met her near the barn, sleeves rolled, hands streaked with pitch from the shingles. "You all right?" Willa nodded. "I needed to remember him. My father." He stepped aside, letting her pass without pressing. But as she reached the porch, she paused. "He always wanted me to have a place of my own." Said nothing steadies a person like ground under their name. Silas set the hammer down. "Then we'll carve yours into the frame." She turned. "You mean that?" "I do." That night, after Eli had gone to bed and the last of the dishes were drying on the board, Willa stood by the fire, arms folded tight beneath her shawl. Silas came in from bringing water, hair damp with melted snow. "I never asked," she said, "why you left Texas." He removed his coat, hanging it near the stove. "My brother stayed there, took the land my father left us. I thought leaving meant I'd stop seeing what didn't get built between us." "You close?" "Not anymore." Willa stepped closer, voice low. "You ever want to go back?" He shook his head. "I've got more here than I ever did there." She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and brought it to her waist. The space between them folded away, and when they kissed, it was slow, no urgency, no question, just a kind of knowing. Her hand slid into his hair, his arm wrapped around her back, and the hearth crackled behind them. They didn't rush. Come morning, they would rise and tend the chickens. Eli would holler from the loft asking for bread. Silas would ride to town for nails. But tonight, they stood wrapped in each other's warmth, the storm outside forgotten. Months passed. The cabin finished just as the frost broke. Willa and Eli moved in with their quilts and the rocker her mother had once used. Silas built shelves for the jars of plum preserves that Willa put up in the summer, and Eli hung the carving of Boone over the door. By the next harvest, the fields behind the house had been cleared and planted. Potatoes, mostly, and a row of beans that climbed the fence posts like they'd been waiting for it. The chickens had doubled. The dog named Birch now kept the foxes from the coop and slept near the hearth every night. On a morning bright with the scent of juniper, Willa stood on the stoop brushing flour from her apron. Silas came up the path carrying a cedar box he'd carved over winter. Inside it, a ring simple, smooth, nothing grand, but made with his own hands. He didn't kneel. He just took her palm in his, opened the box, and said, "If it's still what you want." Willa answered by slipping the ring on herself. They were married in the clearing behind the house. No preacher, just a paper signed by a neighbor who could read, and the sky wide and blue above them. Eli stood beside them with a wildflower tucked behind one ear. Birch barked once when they kissed, and then lay down in the sun. Years passed. The house grew. A second room, then a porch with a swing. Eli built a coop of his own and traded eggs for bolts of cloth in town. Willa taught him to read by lantern light, and Silas showed him how to shoe a horse without scaring it. They never left Willow Creek. They didn't need to. Willa's laughter came easy now, and Silas slept sound, one hand always resting near hers. They built something steady, and it held.